Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Horvath. I'm the mayor of the city of West Hollywood and president of California Contract Cities Association. And I want to welcome you to today's first ever All Cities Virtual Candidate Forum, featuring incumbent Los Angeles County District Attorney, the Honorable Jackie Lacey, and challenger, former District Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, as well as a former Assistant Chief of LAPD, the Honorable George Gascon. This election proves to be a consequential one from the local to the national level, and I am so grateful to each of you for choosing to participate in the conversation today and to be educated on the issues as well as the candidates. And I'm especially grateful to both candidates for agreeing to be part of today's discussion. As you might know, I was originally billed as one of the moderators, but at the request of one of the campaigns, and certainly out of respect for the office of District Attorney, I will not be moderating, and Stacey Armato will be representing California Contract Cities Association today. It's, for my opinion, too important to have not both of our candidates participate, though I will say my brother, who's a criminal defense attorney in Nevada, was impressed to hear my ability to read questions from a note card was cause for concern. But that being said, I'll turn it over to our moderators, Mayor Blanca Pacheco of the City of Downey, President of LA County Division of the League of California Cities and Executive Committee Member for California Contract Cities Association, as well as Councilmember Stacey Armato from the City of Hermosa Beach, Legislative Committee Chair for California Contract Cities Association, and Board Member for Independent Cities Association. I'll turn it over to you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I'd like to start off with just welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. It is my pleasure holding this candidates forum in partnership with our contract cities partners. And I'm here on behalf of the League's Los Angeles County Division. I am the president of the LA Division. And in putting this together, we wanted to give our city officials an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates on their positions and their vision for the future of the DA's office. There can be a lot of information out there, and we wanted to make sure we were able to hear directly from the candidates. So I want to thank both candidates. I want to thank District Attorney Lacey and Mr. Gascon for joining us here today. I know you are both very busy, and I look forward to hearing from both of you. I am now going to proceed with just going over the format and ground rules for today's candidate forum. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their platform. Following introductions, we will ask a series of questions on the following subject areas for approximately 40 minutes. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. The subject areas include the following: District Attorney Law Enforcement Relationship, Propositions 47 and 57, Prosecution of Habitual Offenders, Equitable Distribution of Justice, the DA's role in public safety reform, and the future of the DA's office. As moderators, we will then take questions from attendees for approximately 10 minutes, and questions will focus on issues relating to city issues and impacts on our residents. Lastly, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Questions will be asked by myself and Stacey as moderators, with each candidate alternating on who will speak first. Now for some ground rules. Candidates are expected to stay within the allotted time for opening statements, question-answer periods, and closing statements. A timer will be provided for reference. This event is intended to be a forum and not a debate. Each candidate will refrain from interrupting while the other is speaking and should not address each other throughout the forum. Again, thank you for participating in the inaugural All Cities District Attorney Candidate Forum. If anybody watching has any questions or concerns, please contact Marcel Rodarte at marcel@contractcities.org or Jennifer Kwan at jkwan, Q-U-A-N, @cacities.org. I will now invite District Attorney Lacey to give opening remarks. You will have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pacheco and Mayor Amato. It's an honor to see all of you, well, not really see you, but address you virtually in this forum. I just want to tell you a little bit about my background, my accomplishments. I grew up in the Los Angeles area. I'm from the Crenshaw district, which is basically an African-American community. I went to public schools, and after public schools, I went to UC Irvine, and I ended up going to USC for law school. I was one of 4 African Americans in my class at USC Law School to graduate. After law school, I became a prosecutor and ended up staying as a prosecutor for 28 years. And during my time as a prosecutor, I've tried everything from sex crimes to cases involving gangs to homicides. But my most noteworthy trial was the case of a hate crime murder that occurred in Antelope Valley, where I convicted 3 folks who were white supremacists of murder. Since I've been DA, I've been working on mental health. I established the first mental health advisory board. I've been working on homelessness. I have been working on seeking treatment for drug addiction. I established a conviction review unit. I established a complex child abuse unit. I dismissed 60,000 marijuana convictions. I have rebranded that office so that defendants can get fair trials by giving over more exculpatory evidence. And I have protected the community and done so in a fair and ethical manner. I'm running again because the future of that office and our county is at stake. And I believe you can do criminal justice reform, but you have to do it in a deliberate and safe manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now invite Mr. Gascon to give opening remarks, and you will also have 2 minutes as well.
Great, thank you, Mayor Pacheco and Council Member Amato and all those that are in the audience. I grew up in Carajay. I came from an immigrant family. We moved into Carajay in the mid-1960s. I was poor. I was the first kid to go to college in my family, but actually I dropped out of high school initially, went to the US Army, and from the Army went to Cal State Long Beach, where I got a BA degree in history. And from there, I went to the LAPD. We went through the ranks from a patrol officer all the way to assistant chief. I was later recruited and became a chief of police in Mesa, Arizona. And from there, I was recruited by our governor, now then Mayor Newsom, and became the chief of police of San Francisco. When our now Senator, former Attorney General, and former district attorney in San Francisco became the Attorney General, I became the district attorney in San Francisco and was the district attorney there for 2 terms, almost 9 years altogether. I believe that this race is really about 3 major components: is safety, reform, and accountability. And I don't believe that you can separate them. I think they're legs to a stool that travel together. In my history as a police officer in City 8, every place that I've worked, I have worked really hard to reduce crime, including when I left the LAPD as a chief of operations, seeing reductions in violent crime by 27%, and seeing reductions in violent crime per capita as a district attorney in San Francisco. Reform is critical to our work as well. I believe that the work that I've done around reform by reducing incarceration has also helped. And finally, accountability is critical. We cannot have legitimacy in our system if we do not have accountability of the system, and that's both for police officers and prosecutors. It is my strongly held belief that when you bring the 2 together, you create more safety in our community, and you actually create more sustainable manners of protecting our community.
Thank you. Next, we will have some questions for the both of you. Our first topic will be district attorney and law enforcement relationships. Recent national protests have resulted in calls to defund the police. What are your views on defunding the police? And what is your position on the relationship between the district attorney's office and local law enforcement? I will start off with Mr. Gascon. You will have 90 seconds.
Look, I think there's a fine balance that needs to be established, and I think it's very important to distinguish police work in police departments from police associations. They are very different animals. I've spent a lifetime in law enforcement, nearly 30 years with the LAPD. I worked around policing most of my life, both as a police officer, a police chief, and a prosecutor. And I understand the distinction between police unions and police departments everywhere that I've worked. I have strived and have been able to work well in reducing crime and ensuring the safety of our community. It is critically important, though, that a district attorney understands that he or she is the gatekeeper of the system. They're not supposed to be on the police teams. They're not supposed to be in anybody's team other than the people's team. So the police must understand that that relationship is going to be one of cooperation, but also that the district attorney is the gatekeeper. The district attorney is supposed to ensure that there is system integrity across the board, including police departments as well as other public actors. Public corruption, public distrust comes from a system where the district attorney is not holding people accountable. So again, finding a balance between working in collaboration and ensuring that you're doing your job as a gatekeeper, I believe is critically important to maintaining the legitimacy of the system.
Thank you. I will now have District Attorney Lacey answer the same question. You have 90 seconds.
Thank you for the question. I do not support defunding the police if it means we're going to have less police officers on the street. I grew up in a community where we didn't feel that the police cared, that police responses were slow, where there was crime. And so I know how important it is that when you dial 911, that someone answers. That said, I do believe that there are situations where we can be much more creative and have social workers respond with the police. That's one of my signature projects. I have increased the number of what's called co-deployed teams that can respond to someone with a mental health issue. In the cities that are on this call, we actually have doubled the number of co-deployed teams, and they have been very successful in de-escalating a situation with those with mental health. I do have the respect of the police, and I believe it's because of two things. One is that I treat them like human beings. I have the respect of them because they know I work hard. I have been in the courtroom, tried cases, and work with them to solve problems as opposed to throw them under the bus. And I think that's the difference between myself and my opponent. He was a police officer, and yet he is now willing to sort of, throw them under the bus and promise he's going to prosecute them. I prosecuted over 200 officers, both on and off-duty conduct. I have the only officer-involved shooting case currently pending, and I still have their respect, and it's because I am a genuine individual.
Thank you both for your answers. Let's move on to the next question. What's the role of the District Attorney's Office in improving public safety and the relationship between the DA, the police, and the public while ensuring transparency and accountability? DA Lacey, you have 90 seconds.
It's my position that the DA ought to lead reform. That's what I've been doing since 2007 with regard to alternative sentencing courts. A long time ago, we looked at drug addiction and realized it was pointless to keep sending people to jail. What they really need was treatment. So I started drug courts. Before I became DA, I actually was involved in starting women's reentry court, drug court, veterans court, all of these things, and now working on the Office of Diversion for homeless courts. The DA should lead, and it should be a DA who's had experience at the ground level, because you can have these ideas, but if you don't really know how it all plays out, you're going to end up making mistakes. I think with regard to the community, the DA does have to be accessible to the community, does have to be accessible to you as leaders, and hear your concerns about your issues, because each city is very different. Some of the other reforms that we really haven't talked about have to do with, and they're tougher. They're with, registration, sex registration. We cleaned that law up in LA County. Also with U visas, we've worked on making it easier for those who are juveniles to get U visas. But I do believe the DA has to lead the reform and is the appropriate person to lead the reform. And that's why I've been involved in reform since before I got elected.
Thank you. Mr. Gascon?
Look, I don't believe that you can be a reformer or believe in leading reform if you have opposed reform for most of your career. That is a problem that I see consistently coming from my opponent. And as to relationships, conflict of interest matters. Taking millions of dollars from police unions has a tendency to impact your credibility. The elected DA is the county's chief law enforcement officer. And we're a historic juncture in our country where people are demanding a different vision, a vision of independence and courage. And we need to end decades of mass incarceration, policies that have broken families, communities, and the bank, which impacts many of you, without necessarily yielding any additional returns when it comes to public safety. I believe also that one of the obligations of the district attorney in a county like ours is to ensure that we are providing equal service across the county. And that entails that we also have clear and constant communication, because the needs of Hermosa Beach are often going to be different than those of Downey or another part of the county. I believe that using data and science is critical to being able to get our work done, and I have a reputation for using those very well. But our system has to begin to shift in a different direction, a direction that talks about compassion, humanity, that is victim and community centered, and that is fiscally responsible. We cannot continue to take such a large chunk of the local budget for law enforcement.
Thank you.
Thank you both. The next topic is Prop 47 and 57, prosecution of habitual offenders. Here's a question. Both the California Contract Cities Association and the League of California Cities LA Division support Proposition 20, in part because of the increasing calls for service related to serial theft and crimes committed by habitual offenders. What are your views on Proposition 20? And if elected DA, how will your office address these types of issues facing our cities? I will start with Mr. Gascon. You have 90 seconds.
I believe that the issue of Proposition 47 and 57 is one that deserves greater analysis. The reality is that beginning with crime, there is plenty of data that shows that crime really did not go up as a result of Prop 47. We have seen two studies now, one by the Public Policy Institute that found some correlation between car break-ins and Prop 47, and University of California, Irvine that found absolutely no connection. By the way, car break-ins are not part of Prop 47. What Prop 47 has done is Prop 47 is putting hundreds of millions of dollars every year into local communities for services, and services that need to be increased. I believe that actually moving away from Prop 47 and 57 and going back to some of the old policies of increasing incarceration will reduce resources from contract cities instead of adding resources, and it would lead to going back to a system that has proven over and over that was broken. In my opinion, looking back is not the answer to public safety. We need to begin to look forward and continue to improve the process of community safety in our community in a way that is thoughtful, is responsible, both physically and socially. And I don't believe that going back to the old ways is necessarily the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Gascon. Now the same question to DA Lacy. You have 90 seconds.
Sure, if I may, I just have a chart I'll hold up. It's low tech to the camera here. And the gold line is the property crime rates after Prop 47 in California. And the blue line is what happened around the country. Crime went down around the country, but after Prop 47, property crime did go up. And you could say there's no correlation. It just doesn't make any sense. Here's the way Mayor Garcetti described the issue that you all are facing. He says he didn't support Prop 47. He just flipped, and he is endorsing my opponent. But here's what he said. If someone gets arrested, they're not going to serve any time in jail. If they do serve time in jail, they're not going to be prosecuted. If they do get prosecuted, they're not going to be sentenced. And if they are sentenced, they're out right away. It's a broken system. I've not been afraid to say it. I know sometimes because I'm a Democrat, people think that's wrong. But he basically says that there's no accountability. And so that's really been the issue with Prop 47. With Prop 57, people are getting out early. And we got to see what happens. But here's where I stand. I think that it's up to leaders to make it work. I am making it work in LA County. We're using that money to get people treatment. And I'd like to give it more time, so I am not supporting Prop 20.
Thank you both. Moving on now to a multi-part question on the topic of equitable distribution of justice. What are your views on Prop 25 and the cash bail system? How would your office operate if the measure
I'm sorry, I lost the sound for you, Stacy. At the end, I did not hear the whole question. Can I ask you to
No
repeat
problem.
it?
I'll repeat the entire question.
Thank you.
What are your views on Proposition 25 and the cash bail system? How would your office operate if the measure passes? And if the measure fails, what will you do differently to address inequities in the cash bail system?
So I hope that that you all support the end to cash bail. I worked on SB 10 to help get it passed, and then a referendum came, and now it's on the ballot on Prop 25. You know, the commercial is out, and it's an interesting commercial. It shows you how the inequities of bail work. You have a wealthy white guy who gets out, and then you have a black man who is, who is elderly, who ends up staying in. And that shouldn't happen. He stole $5. The other person was charged with rape of an unconscious person. We should, in fact, work, and we are working with the LA County Superior Court to enact bail reform. It's actually already started. We're going to use a risk assessment tool. We're going to work over the weekends and do that. And what I want to say is this, that the man who's in that commercial that you see is out of San Francisco. He's prosecuted by my opponent, Mr. Gascon. And while he was saying he was against cash bail because it was inequitable, that man was held in jail for 365 days. That shouldn't be. Either you're for it or you're against it. Either you are ready to implement it or you're not. And I'm already working with LA County to implement it in a safe manner and make sure that people who are not dangerous don't get out, but people who are poor do get out if they can return to court.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gascon?
Yes, I support Prop 25. I actually was the first district attorney back in 2012 that came out against cash bail. And unlike my opponent, I did not work to actually complicate SB 10 to the point that it is now, where so many people have so many concerns about the implementation. Having said that, the reality is that we need to get rid of cash bail. If Prop 25 works, I'm going to work really hard to implement it as is currently written. And if Prop 25 were to fail, I will work with other stakeholders to ensure that the vestiges of cash bail are not going to continue to punish the poor. But there are a couple of things that come to mind when we're talking about the equitable distribution of justice, especially in the county, because the reality is that we need to start looking at the law and looking at race as something that it does have an impact. And the fair and equitable distribution of our work and ensuring that we eliminate the vestiges of systemic racism in our county are very important. And unfortunately, LA County has been a county that continuously has discriminated over people of color and poor people by the extremely punitive manners of doing the work. In addition to that, we're often not serving every community equally. And I know that many of you that are especially in the contract cities outside of the center of the city of LA have come to me complaining about the lack of responsiveness from the district attorney's office and other county entities. And if I were to be elected, one of my goals would be to ensure that we work together to end that practice.
Thank you both. The next question is a two-part question. What are your views on the current political climate regarding racial and social justice? What will you do in your capacity as a district attorney to address these issues? Starting with Mr. Gascon.
Thank you. This is an area that I've been working for a very long time, especially as a district attorney. Many people call me the godfather of progressive prosecutors because I started a movement that is now sweeping around the nation. And the movement is about striking a balance between community safety and equity under the law. What you're seeing, especially LA County, and we're seeing it in front of the Hall of Justice very often, people protesting the practices of my opponent because of the discriminatory impact that they've had and her refusal to meet with people and her refusal to move forward into a different system. There's no question that there is discrimination and the impacts of systemic racism impact every community in this country. They are the vestiges of slavery and we all live with it. There's disproportionality in every jail from San Francisco to LA to New York. The question is, what do we do about it and how active? Are we leading the charge in order to bring a different reality to our county and our country? Or do we continue to tie ourselves to the past? Do we continue to look for the things that over-incarcerate? Do we continue to look for practices that we know that have proven to be wrong over and over again? Or are we willing to learn? Are we willing to evolve and get to a different place? And I think that is a major difference between my opponent and I. My opponent said one time, not very long ago, that she was the same person that she was in 1980. And I believe that that is right, and that is precisely her problem. She has not evolved.
Thank you. Same question for you, D.A. Lacey.
Mr. Gascon hasn't evolved. He's become a politician. A lot of the things that he's talking about doing here in LA County, he did not get done in San Francisco. For instance, with mass incarceration, did you know that 40% of the people in jail and prosecuted in San Francisco while he was DA were Black? Here in LA County, it's like 22%. And so what is he bringing? What did he do? Striking the balance. The property crime rate in San Francisco is at 49%. That's the highest in the nation. It's the highest in the nation. San Francisco people are not as safe from violent crime as people in LA County. The rate of violent crime in San Francisco is like over 679 per 100,000 people. Here in LA County, it's 500 and something. It's less than. So here's my question. If you couldn't get it done in 9 years in a smaller jurisdiction where people were wealthier, where you had more resources, what makes you think you could come here in LA County? He had his protesters. He had websites up against him. He faced the same criticism. All prosecutors are being, challenged on this issue. But I'm saying, look at the details, look at the facts. The way to work on racism in a criminal justice system, first of all, is to make sure that the laws apply to everyone. Crime doesn't choose the race of the person chooses to commit the crime, and how you respond is how you make the system fair.
Thank you both. Moving on to questions relating to the DA's role in public safety reform. Both the Contract Cities Association and the League of California Cities, Los Angeles County Division, are opposed to Measure J. The main reason for the opposition is due to a lack of well thought out stakeholder engagement and what appeared to be a rushed process to place the measure on the ballot. What are your views on Measure J, and what impacts do you predict Measure J would have on the DA's office if passed by the voters? DA Lacey, you have 90 seconds.
I actually couldn't have said it better than that question. It was rushed. I think it was 2 weeks. They put it out there. And I do believe that you ought to examine it and look at it. The way I understand Measure J, is a certain percentage of the sheriff's budget is going to be cut, and then they're going to guarantee 10% for social services. But if you look at the budget, they're spending about 23, 24% on social services. So they're already doing a great job. I've worked very, very closely with the Board of Supervisors. And when I printed out or published, the blueprint for change on mental health, they dedicated $120 million to start the Office of Diversion and Reentry to help do more to help people have a mental health issue. Measure J, I don't think it's going to help us, and I think that may have unintended consequences. And I would hope, because I just believe the Board of Supervisors do a great job in budgeting, I would hope that because we don't know what's coming in the future, that Measure J doesn't pass. We could end up with fires, we could have an earthquake, we could have another surge in the virus. There are so many variables that it could occur in the future, and you need the flexibility with the budget to shift, to move things. We could have a crime wave, and they will want the police to respond to your city. And so it's important to have flexibility in budgeting. And so I just think budgeting at the ballot box is not a good idea.
Thank you. Mr. Gascon?
Yes, thank you. You know, one of the things that we did in San Francisco is that we lowered our incarceration rate. We were the only county jail that consistently run about 27% vacancy, and we lower violent crime. In fact, the current DAs in LA failed to tell you that violent crime under her leadership has gone up by 27% in the county and by 50% in the city of LA. In San Francisco was the reverse. It actually went down. And property crime in San Francisco has started to go down after we had a shift in police leadership. The reality is that over the last 3 decades, we have continued to grow the budgets of public safety, and we have done so at the expense of other services that are critically important to ensure that we create more sustainable public safety models. Mental health, education, intervention, drug treatment, all those things are not done well when they're done by public safety departments. There are people that train to do this work, and we need to ensure that we begin the shifting of funding to the places that are going to yield the greatest result, because that will create a much more sustainable public safety model. And that is a reason why I am supporting Measure J, because I believe that that conversation has to be real. Otherwise, we continue to talk about it and we do not see action towards the evolution of our system. We were not always this way. We were not always spending over 50% of our city budgets on police and public safety. We need to look at a different answer.
Thank you both. Next question. Given the shift in political climate relating to calls for public safety reform, in your view, what role does the district attorney's office have in public safety reform? Mr. Gascon?
I believe that the DA actually has a central role in public safety reform, and you have to believe in reform before you can play that role, right? My opponent talks about being a reformer, but the reality is, if you look at her history, she has opposed every single measure of reform that has come down her desk in the last 8 years. And she continues to talk about being a reasonable reformer, but her actions do not support that. She incarcerates at 4 times the rate that we did in San Francisco, but her violent crime went up. And I'm talking about rate. I'm not talking about raw numbers. I believe that you need a district attorney that believes in the public, that believes in engaging community, and that has a vision for the future that is not a rear view mirror. I believe that looking back is important only as a learning process, using data, using science, but we cannot continue to use the same solutions that we've used for the last 40 years that haven't necessarily worked, double down on them, and believe that somehow we're going to get a different result. The definitions of community safety are evolving. Our community is demanding different types of police safety and public safety in general. We know that using incarceration as a tool to deal with mental health and poverty has not yielded any results. It certainly hasn't made us any safer. But what we have done as a nation, as a county, is created liability that continues to drag. Look at how much money you're paying on lawsuits. Look how much money you're paying on public safety, and ask yourself if what you have today is working.
Thank you, Mr. Gascon. Same question for you, DA Lacy.
Could I ask you to repeat it again, Blanca, please?
Yes, definitely. Given the shift in political climate relating to calls for public safety reform, in your view, what role does the district attorney's office have in public safety reform?
You know, in terms of the public safety reform, the police chiefs have to respect you. The police have to respect you. I have the endorsement of the your LA County Police Chiefs Association, because we haven't always agreed, but in terms of me leading them, they have permitted me to lead on a very important area, and that of mental health. If you talk to them, they'll know about the Criminal Justice Mental Health Advisory Committee. And they'll tell you that things changed from 5 years ago after that. Officer-involved shootings went down, more training occurred, and we had more co-deployed teams. You know, contrast that with my opponent. If you look at a lot of the headlines that happened while he was in San Francisco, he was at war half the time with the police chief. He was at war half the time with the mayor there. He was at war half the time with law enforcement. And you're not going to lead reform by just uttering something. You know, I led on mental health, and about a year later, my opponent copied me. He put out something called a paper, like a position paper or something. You know what happened to that? He suggested a behavioral health center. It was voted down by a work group by almost 20%, and he could only get 20% of the vote. That's not leading. You're not going to be able to dictate what happens. People have to respect you, they have to listen to you, and they have to want to follow you. And that's the difference between our leadership styles.
Thank you both. And now let's discuss the future of the DA's office. Should you be elected to serve as the Los Angeles District Attorney for the next 4 years, what's your vision of the District Attorney's office? And what changes would you implement to better serve the residents of LA County? DA Lacy, you have 90 seconds.
Well, I want to continue the work we started on mental health. We still do not have enough places to send people. You all in the cities probably know that from Project Roomkey. You know, that this is a difficult issue. That's the biggest issue actually facing us. And I want to continue to leverage the county to create more full supportive housing so that we can get a lot of the people who are homeless off the streets and into treatment, and so they can be well and live in our society safely. I want to focus in on juvenile crimes. You know, they're shutting down the state juvenile facility, and those juveniles will be shifted to the county. And I'm not sure that probation is ready, and so I want to work on figuring out how we can get more of those juveniles help, because they're going to be doing less time as a result of the governor shutting that down. I want to work on bail reform. I do believe Prop 25 is going to pass come November 3rd. I want to work on figuring out how to get the community more involved in giving feedback and input to the DA's office. I realize I hear the protesters. I know I have offered to meet with them. Unfortunately, that it won't be at 5 a.m. at my house, but I have offered to meet with them. I've offered to meet with small groups. But I'm all about working for solutions. We can scream, we can yell, we can have rage, but what's next? What's next is exciting, because I do see a better Los Angeles County for all of us, and the DA's office playing a key role.
Thank you. Mr. Gascon?
Yes, I believe that it is important that we continue to have a vision that moves away from the past and embraces science, embraces data, and embraces community. And that is work that I've done for nearly all my life in policing and as a district attorney. And that's something that we don't see happening here in LA. We hear a lot of rhetoric about a mental health service, but yeah, you talk to people, including the Ryan Corporation, that would say that the mental health, the way that mentally ill people are treated by LA County DA is horrendous. It is true that I brought a new blueprint for mental health services in San Francisco, and I made the mistake of using politicians instead of going directly to the public. I will not make the same mistake again. But I think it's really important that we work together towards the development of public safety that does not continue to look to the back, to the bad old days, and believe that we're going to get a different result. Our communities are demanding a very different type of work. We need to ensure that police and prosecutors are working with communities hand in hand in order to embrace science, in order to embrace data, in order to bring programs that will work and move away from those that do not work. We cannot continue to criminalize poverty. We cannot continue to criminalize mental health and believe that somehow that is going to make us safer. It never will.
Thank you both. The next several questions will be audience questions. If anybody watching has any questions that you have, and if we have time to ask them, we will do so. But you can ask them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I will proceed with the first question. What role do you see for cities in collaboration with the DA's office? This goes to Mr. Gascon first.
Look, I don't know how to govern without working with all the stakeholders. That has been a hallmark of my work wherever I've been. It doesn't mean that we're always going to agree, and certainly I have had my detractors, but the reality is that working with the people that you're serving is critically important. As the district attorney in San Francisco, I work very closely with the board of supervisors, and I work with many community groups. We have regular advisory groups that came in from all across our county to ensure that our policies and our work reflected the most present needs of our community. If I were to be elected district attorney in LA, one of the things that I have found out pre-COVID, especially as I went through the county, was the lack of communications between the DA, especially the elected DA, and elected members of other city councils and other bodies around the county. And I made a commitment very early on that if I were to be elected, that will change. Why is that? I grew up in Cudahy. I grew up in a community that would very seldom get any attention from anybody, much less a district attorney's office. And as I walk around the county, I went to Pomona, I went to the Antelope Valley, and I kept listening to the same complaints. We never get direct input, and when we call the district attorney, nobody responds to our calls. I guarantee you that if I were to be elected DA, we will begin a process of putting prosecutors around the county that will be working directly with you. I will be personally available to you for regular meetings because I don't believe that I can do my work well unless I hear you out.
Thank you, Mr. Gascon. Same question for you, DA Lacy.
Yes, I have attended contract cities and independent cities meetings in the past. I've sent representatives to those meetings to listen. We have branch areas out in all of the different judicial districts. And I do think that the role you can play is for us to talk more, for us to collaborate more, and for us to share information more. And I do know that for many of you, I have met you, I have talked to you. The DA's office is responsive. It is not what he says it is, but he is listening to people who are detractors. Here's what I'll say. You know, he was in San Francisco, much smaller area, one mayor, one city attorney, and they both turned around and endorsed me. If that relationship, if he really was skilled at building that relationship, how can you come in and build a relationship with 88 cities when you couldn't build a relationship with just one mayor and one city attorney? So we've got a lot to work on. I look forward to making sure that you all are safe and that your cities understand that we care about you. I do want to point out one thing. When he was in San Francisco, he only filed 40% of the misdemeanors, and misdemeanors are important in cities. We file about 80%. That was his way to sort of say, let's cut down on crime and or let's cut down on cases. But you all know, those are the ones where you're going to get the residents calling you at night, letting you know, look, these are problems, do something.
Thank you both very much. Moving on to a multi-part question about people experiencing homelessness. With the growing prevalence of homelessness in our cities, especially as it relates to mental health victims experiencing homelessness, what's your approach on prosecution versus treatment? And do you have any specific programs you would continue or new programs that you would propose? DA Lacey, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, I keep hearing that on the campaign trail, incarcerating people who are homeless. We don't do that. We normally, in the DA's office, we file felonies and we file misdemeanors and certain, it is not a crime to be homeless, so that's false. That isn't to say that sometimes people who are homeless don't end up getting arrested for a crime. And our position is we send those who have a mental health issue over to the Office of Diversion Homeless Court. That was something that started as a result of our discussion and our group working on mental health diversion. Is what happens is instead of going to prison or jail, they actually go to these courts and they're put in what's called full supportive housing. And as long as they cooperate with their treatment, they can stay there forever. There they get mental health treatment, drug treatment, whatever they need right there. So far, the court decides who goes, but there's been almost about 4,000 people placed in these. So I want to expand those around the county to make sure that we get people who are homeless into that kind of housing. San Francisco is a little bit behind us. If you look, I read a lot about San Francisco. They're still struggling with some of the issues that we have, but I think what the DA can do is if people happen to come into the criminal justice system, don't send them to prison, jail, make sure that they go to the full supportive housing option.
Thank you. Mr. Gascon?
Yeah, actually San Francisco has been a leader in the space. In fact, many of the programs that we started in San Francisco have been replicated, including our neighborhood court program, which actually the city attorney in LA took and is using here. You know, it is true that we had a lower filing rate in misdemeanors than LA, but there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, we diverted a lot of people to our neighborhood courts. We diverted a lot of people to restorative justice models that worked and reduce recidivism. And also we were the gatekeepers of the system. I think that the problem is my opponent forgets that her job is to ensure that the system is working fairly for everyone. And what we often see, and one of the problems why this office is so plagued by wrongful convictions, according to Loyola Innocence Project, somewhere around 1,000 cases that are pending is because you have a culture that values prosecutions over any other work. And often they prosecute cases even when they're not supposed to. I mean, there's a term that they use for young DAs when they give them a case and say, walk the dog. And that term refers to giving them a case that they know that the evidence is not there, that the case should not be prosecuted, but they move forward anyway. When my opponent says that they are not prosecuting the homeless, all you have to look is at our county jail and look who's there. You know, it's been said that one of the greatest predictors of houselessness is actually engaging and jailing someone for a short period of time and making them lose their job, and then they end up getting evicted and they become houseless when there was other way to do the business.
Thank you both. The next question, do you support the creation of mobile crisis intervention units similar to the City of Eugene's Cahoots program? Would you support such programs and how would you fund them? We're starting with Mr. Gascon. You have 90 seconds.
Yes, I do. I think it's critically important that we begin to move from law enforcement solutions in areas where we can bring people that are trained to deal with the problem. And certainly when it comes to mental health, I strongly believe that the model that we have used for years hasn't worked. The primary responders to this type of calls should be people that are trained in mental health work, and they should not be wearing a badge and a gun. A badge and a gun has a tendency to rise the anxiety and create more likelihoods of violence and bad outcomes than otherwise. How will we fund this? Is something that we need to work together. That's why I believe that, for instance, Measure J will begin to provide funding and space so that we can start experimenting with this kind of work. As we reduce the work of law enforcement by reducing our pretrial incarceration and by reducing areas where police are currently responding, where we can use other people, that money can go into beginning to fund these other services. I don't necessarily support increasing taxes. To the contrary, I believe that there is enough there, even under these tough times, to make sure that we find different and more creative ways to do our work. I also believe, by the way, that when we begin to reform the system, your liability, the money that you pay into a pool if you're a contract city, or the money that you pay if you have your own police department, will be consistently reduced as you reduce the times and the places where you get sued over and over again for areas that often police cannot do right, even if they try, because they're not trained to do so.
The next question is the same for DA Lacy.
Yes. So for those who don't know what Cahoots is, it's working quite well in Oregon. And what it does is when you call 911, well, you probably don't call 911 for a mental health issue, rather than calling 911 and having the police respond. Instead, you have a team of clinicians respond. It's a great idea. LA County is already working on this. We've been meeting over the last month and a half, and our meetings are conducted by Dr. John Sharon, Department of Mental Health, and he has asked myself and the police department to come along. The issue is spending the money to create something other than 911, and then of course educating folks on that. So we're well on our way to actually implementing that in LA County, and I think it'll be a great project. I'm very supportive of it. We have to work out the details though, in terms of what happens when it becomes dangerous. Can you get the police there in time? But I believe that this is something that's well on its way. In terms of funding, there's state funding under the Mental Health Services Act that actually LA County ended up not spending it all down and giving some back. So I think that that's a pot of money that maybe should be looked at for spending on something like this. But I want to remind you, when I say that LA is ahead of the game, San Francisco doesn't have Cahoots. They don't have that. If my opponent really thought that this was a great idea, why didn't he do it there?
Thank you both. I think we have reached now our last question, and it's on the topic of body cameras. How do you feel about body cameras and expedited access to related footage to ensure overall law enforcement integrity and our public's and city's trust? We're going to start with you, DA Lacy, and I think we're going to mark down the time to 60 seconds.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Okay, so remember when I was telling you about Measure J, like if you legislate how you spend money, you could hamstring yourself in the future, you could restrict yourself in the future. I think all law enforcement officers should have body cameras, and they should be available for everybody who is dealing with the public, and maybe some who are not dealing with the public, because you never know when someone like the officer who was in Harbor Division got attacked. I'm glad there were cameras showing what happened. But if they don't have enough money, then you're not going to see them all with cameras. So I have the Bureau of Investigations working for me. We have 300 sworn law enforcement. I want them all to have body cameras. We've had to wait for the sheriff to get their contract together. We're piggybacking on the sheriff, but I think they should all have body cameras. They are game changers in terms of accountability and in terms of transparency. So I want to see everybody with a body camera.
Thank you. Mr. Gascon, 60 seconds.
Yes, I support body cameras, and I also believe that we in government, as we in our homes, have to manage our budget. And when times are tough, there's going to be reductions, and sometimes there are things that we don't get to have, and then we have to prioritize. And while I do not believe that body cameras are the answer to every problem, especially when it comes to police accountability, if that were the case, LA County would have one of the most accountable counties when it comes to this problem. The reality is that body cameras are a good tool. Now, I don't necessarily believe that that is necessarily a case that cannot be made, that we should not do other things to ensure that police accountability and system accountability overall takes place, because there are many cases where we see that even without body cameras, we have plenty of information to understand what occurred. So budgeting is important. We're supposed to stay within our budget. One of the things that I did as a district attorney is every year I came within budget or under, because I am a fiscal hawk when it comes to running my own business.
Thank you both. And since we're nearing the end of our time together, I want to offer each of our candidates 2 minutes for their closing statements. We're going to start with you, Mr. Gascon.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity. I believe that this election cycle is going to be, we're in a historical moment, not only in our country, but in our community. And we're confronted with many questions about what type of community do we want to be? What do we want our future to look like? And we are a fork. We're a fork nationally, and we're a fork here in this county. And we have two very clear options. We have one option, the current option, which is continue to do business as we've always have. Here is a high incarceration, heavy systemic racism, lack of accountability of police, and quite frankly, many problems within the DA's office, including, as we recently saw, a deputy district attorney doing a piece on Medium where he talks about how he was being forced to prosecute a case where he recognized that not only the evidence wasn't there, but actually the individual that he was being asked to prosecute was an innocent person. And the reason for it is because of the culture. It's a culture that values trial at any cost. And you know, it is true that my opponent has a lot of trial experience. In fact, her trial experience comes exactly from the very culture that we need to move away. The other option is the option that I bring to the table. It's a vision for the future. It's a vision for the 21st century public safety. It's one that brings security, humanity, redemption, and rehabilitation together. It's one that continues to redefine the process by embracing science and data, one that looks at the back, looks towards the back for historical reference, but not necessarily one that looks at the back as a way to continue and to do business. There is a clear difference between both of us. We can continue to do what we've always done, or we can move into a different direction. And I hope that the voters will look at what I offer and understand that safety for our community in the 21st century depends on a very different vision.
Thank you, Mr. Gascon. DA Lacey.
You know, I don't see it as a past and future. I know that's how Mr. Gascon is trying to frame it. I see it as common sense versus pandering to the in crowd. He put together a policy committee that had people on there who were tweeting out things like burn it all down, abolish prisons, and all LAPD are barbarians. I don't think that that's appropriate for the district attorney. I don't think it's appropriate for a district attorney to show up to a defund the police movement. Here's where I stand. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a Los Angeles native. I've worked hard in this office. I'm a woman, African-American woman, who worked her way up from the bottom to the top. No one handed me anything. My opponent never even had a single jury trial when Gavin Newsom turned to him and said, I think you should be the DA. And in 9 years, he never bothered to go into court and litigate a case. This job of being district attorney, it's a serious job. You've got to know a lot. And you've got to always make sure that you keep victims in your view. Today is the first time in all of the debates that I've ever heard him use the term victim. And he only used it once. I believe that you need a district attorney who understands what it's like to be discriminated against and understands how we've got to get rid of racial discrimination in the criminal justice system. Did you know that most of the victims look like me? Most of the victims of violent crime, most of the victims of homicide are African American and Latino. Here's what I say. Don't experiment with LA County. If you weren't a success in a smaller jurisdiction, if you had to quit that race, if you couldn't get elected there, why would you move here, where the stakes are so high and so many lives could be lost just by experimenting because you think you want to try out your ideas? Safety matters.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of my colleague, Mayor Blanca Pacheco, President Horvath, California Contract Cities Association, and the League of California Cities Los Angeles County Division, I want to sincerely thank LA District Attorney candidates Jackie Lacey and George Gascon for participating in this very informative debate. Thank you both for thoughtfully answering all the questions and your extensive public service. For anyone that couldn't be with us today, this forum will be uploaded to the Contract Cities YouTube page. We hope that everyone watching comes away from this debate informed and ready to vote. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.